I was knee-deep in snow at 6 in the morning, clearing my driveway during one of the worst winter storms Colorado had seen in years, when a BMW SUV pulled up, and a woman I'd never met before started screaming at me to hand over my shovel. The storm had hit Denver overnight, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the metro area with no signs of stopping. I'd woken up early specifically to get a head start on clearing my property before I had to leave for work at the hospital. As an ER nurse, missing a shift during a major storm wasn't an option. People would need medical care, and the roads were only going to get worse. I'd moved into this house in Aurora 6 months ago, a nice 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood called Meadowbrook Estates. The place had seemed perfect when I bought it. Quiet street, well-maintained homes, reasonable HOA fees. I'd read through the covenant documents before closing and nothing had seemed unreasonable. Monthly dues were $120, which covered landscaping of common areas and snow removal of neighborhood streets. My own driveway and walkways were my responsibility, which was fine by me. The woman who stepped out of the BMW was probably in her late 40s, wearing a puffy white coat that looked expensive and completely impractical for actually doing any work in the snow. Her blonde hair was styled in that particular way that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and her face was already twisted into an expression of righteous indignation. "Excuse me," she shouted over the wind. "I need that shovel immediately." I paused mid-throw, a heap of snow sliding off my shovel back onto the driveway. "I'm sorry, what?" "The shovel, I need it. There's an emergency on Pinewood Drive and we need all available snow removal equipment." I blinked at her through the falling snow. "This is my shovel. I'm using it." "I'm aware of that," she said, her tone suggesting I was being deliberately obtuse. "But as HOA president, I'm authorized to requisition necessary equipment during neighborhood emergencies." Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Covenant. I'd been shoveling for 45 minutes already and had maybe cleared a third of my driveway. My back was starting to ache, my fingers were going numb despite my gloves, and I still had my front walk and the area around my mailbox to clear. The last thing I needed was some HOA busybody trying to confiscate my property. "Look, I don't know what section you're talking about, but this is my personal shovel that I bought with my own money. I'm using it to clear my own property so I can get to work. I'm not giving it to you." Her eyes narrowed. "What's your name and address, Marcus Zanakis? This is my address. You're standing in front of my house." She pulled out her phone, fingers moving rapidly across the screen despite the cold. "Marcus Zanakis, 2847 Meadowbrook Lane. Got it. You're in violation of HOA regulations by refusing to cooperate during a declared neighborhood emergency. That's a $500 fine for your first offense. A $500 fine for not giving you my shovel." I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. I'm Eileen Dalton, HOA president, and I take my responsibilities to this community very seriously. Now, are you going to hand over that shovel, or do I need to increase the fine?" The absurdity of the situation was almost funny. Almost. But I was cold, tired, and running out of time before my shift started. "Miss Dalton, I don't know what emergency you're dealing with, but I have to get to work. I'm a nurse at University Hospital. People's lives literally depend on me showing up. So no, I'm not giving you my shovel. Feel free to fine me whatever imaginary amount you want." I turned back to my driveway and resumed shoveling. Behind me, I heard her make an outraged noise. "This is completely unacceptable. You're being selfish and inconsiderate, Mrs. Patterson on Pinewood Drive is elderly, and her driveway hasn't been cleared. What if she has a medical emergency and the ambulance can't get through? I paused again. Then the HOA should use the money we all pay in dues to hire a plow service, which is what most HOAs do during major storms. Not go around trying to confiscate people's personal property. The plow service we contracted isn't answering their phones. I've been calling since 5 this morning, so we have to make do with what we have. That sounds like a problem for the HOA board to solve. Maybe knock on doors and ask for volunteers, but you're not taking my shovel. Eileen's face was turning red, which was impressive considering how cold it was. I could have you removed from this property. This is my property. I own this house. You can't have me removed from my own property. We'll see about that. She stomped back to her BMW, which she'd left running in the middle of the street, and drove off with more speed than was wise given the road conditions. I watched her fishtail slightly before regaining control, then shook my head and went back to shoveling. The encounter had cost me nearly 10 minutes and the snow was still coming down. I worked faster, my arms burning with the effort. By the time I'd finished the driveway and front walk, it was nearly 7:30. I was cutting it close. I went inside, stripped off my wet outer layers and jumped in a hot shower just long enough to warm up and rinse off the sweat. Then I pulled on my scrubs, grabbed my work bag, and headed out to my truck. The driveway I just cleared was already starting to accumulate a fresh layer of snow, but at least I could get out. The drive to the hospital normally took 25 minutes. Today, it took an hour and 10 minutes. The main roads had been plowed but were still treacherous, and side streets were a mess. I passed 3 accidents and 2 cars stuck in snowdrifts. By the time I pulled into the hospital parking garage, I was running 15 minutes late and stressed. The ER was predictably chaotic. We had the usual storm-related injuries. Slip and fall cases, a couple of car accidents, one guy who'd had a heart attack while shoveling, and an elderly woman with hypothermia who'd been waiting at a bus stop for over an hour. I threw myself into work, and the morning's weird encounter with the HOA president faded to the back of my mind. My shift was supposed to end at 7 that evening, but we were so slammed that I didn't actually get out until almost 8. The snow had finally stopped, but the temperature had dropped into the single digits. The drive home was another nightmare of icy roads and poor visibility. When I finally pulled onto my street a little after 9, I immediately noticed something wrong. There were 2 cars parked in front of my house. Eileen's BMW and an Aurora police cruiser. My stomach sank. What had she done now? I parked in my driveway, which was now completely buried again under fresh snow, and walked up to my front door. Eileen and a uniformed police officer were standing on my porch. The officer was a young guy, probably mid-20s, looking cold and like he really didn't want to be there. "Can I help you?" I asked, pulling my keys out. "Are you Marcus Zanakis?" the officer asked. "Yes, I live here." "What's going on?" Eileen jumped in before the officer could respond. "Officer Davidson, this is the man I told you about. He's been trespassing and refusing to leave the property." I stared at her. "Trespassing? This is my house." "Mr. Zanakis," Officer Davidson said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Miss Dalton here called saying there was someone refusing to leave this property. She claims she's authorized to have you removed." "This is my house," I repeated, fumbling with my keys in the cold. "I own it. I have the deed, the mortgage, everything. She's the HOA president and she showed up this morning demanding I give her my snow shovel, and I refused." The officer's expression shifted slightly, and I saw understanding dawn. He'd probably been dealing with storm-related nonsense all day and had just realized he'd been called out on some HOA drama. "You have proof of ownership," he asked, which was fair. Yes, inside. Can I go in and get it? Please do. I unlocked my door and went inside, very aware of both of them following me into my entryway. I kept all my important documents in a file box in my home office. I pulled out the folder containing my deed, mortgage documents, and closing paperwork, and brought it back to the officer. He looked through it carefully, then handed it back to me. Mr. Zanakis clearly owns this property, Miss Dalton. But the HOA has authority over all properties in the neighborhood, Eileen protested. Section 18, Paragraph 2 clearly states that the HOA board can take necessary actions to protect property values and neighborhood safety. That doesn't give you the right to have someone removed from their own home, Officer Davidson said. Sir, do you want to file a complaint about this? I was exhausted, freezing, and just wanted to eat something and go to bed. But the look on Eileen's face, that absolute certainty that she was right and I was wrong, made me pause. What exactly did she tell you when she called? I asked. The officer consulted his notepad. She said there was a man trespassing at this address who was refusing to leave and becoming aggressive. I wasn't even here. I've been at work for the past 14 hours. She called about an hour ago, Officer Davidson said. So she called the police to report me trespassing at my own house while I wasn't even home. The officer's jaw tightened. Miss Dalton, filing a false police report is a crime. It wasn't false, Eileen said quickly. I genuinely believed he was trespassing. The HOA has authority over all properties, and he refused to comply with a direct order this morning. That constitutes abandonment of property rights. That's not how property law works, I said. At all. Miss Dalton, Officer Davidson said, and his voice had gone from tired to stern. I'm going to strongly suggest you leave this property now. Mr. Zanakis has every right to be here and you don't. If you refuse to leave, I can arrest you for trespassing. Eileen drew herself up. I'm the HOA president. I have every right to be on HOA properties. This is not HOA property. This is Mr. Zanakis' private property. All properties in Meadowbrook Estates are subject to HOA authority. Subject to HOA rules, maybe, but that doesn't mean they are HOA property. Now please leave. For a moment, I thought Eileen was going to refuse. She stood there on my porch, her face red with anger and cold, looking between me and the officer like she couldn't believe this was happening. Fine, she finally said. But this isn't over, Mr. Zanakis. You're in violation of multiple HOA regulations. Expect to receive formal notice of your fines within 24 hours. Looking forward to it, I said flatly. Officer Davidson escorted her off my porch and down to her BMW. I watched from my doorway as she got in and drove off, still too fast for the conditions. The officer came back up to my porch. Sorry about that, he said. We've been getting calls all day from HOA boards across the city. The storm has everyone stressed, but that was pretty egregious. Is there anything I should do? Document this or something? Might not be a bad idea. If she keeps harassing you, you can file for a restraining order. For now, I'd suggest reviewing your HOA covenant documents and maybe consulting with a lawyer if she actually tries to fine you for not giving her your shovel. Will do. Thanks for sorting this out. No problem. Stay warm. I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and stood in my entryway for a long moment just processing what had happened. Then I went to the kitchen, made myself a sandwich, and pulled out my laptop. I hadn't read the HOA covenant documents in detail before buying. I'd skimmed them, confirmed there were no crazy restrictions on paint colors or lawn ornaments, checked the fee schedule, and called it good. Now I pulled up the PDF I'd been emailed at closing and started reading carefully. It took me almost 2 hours to get through the whole thing. The document was 47 pages long, written in dense legal language, and covered everything from garbage can placement to fence height restrictions. I found Section 12, Paragraph 4, which Eileen had cited that morning. In the event of a neighborhood emergency, as declared by a majority vote of the HOA board, the board is authorized to take reasonable steps to protect residents and property, including but not limited to coordinating emergency services, establishing temporary rules or restrictions, and utilizing available resources for the common good. It was vague enough that I could see how Eileen might interpret it as giving her the right to commandeer my shovel. But utilizing available resources seemed like it should apply to HOA-owned resources, not personal property. And had the board actually voted to declare an emergency? Or had Eileen just decided on her own? Section 18, Paragraph 2, which she'd cited to Officer Davidson, said, "The HOA board is empowered to take necessary actions to maintain property values and ensure neighborhood safety, including enforcement of covenant regulations, imposition of fines for violations, and pursuit of legal remedies for non-compliance." Again, nothing about removing residents from their homes or confiscating personal property. I kept reading and found Section 23 particularly interesting. It outlined the process for fines. Any fine over $100 required written notice to the homeowner, an opportunity for the homeowner to respond or appeal, and approval by a majority of the board. Eileen had threatened me with a $500 fine on the spot, with no notice or appeals process. I was starting to get the feeling that Eileen Dalton didn't actually follow the HOA's own rules very closely. I finally went to bed around midnight, setting my alarm for 6. The hospital had called and asked if I could come in for an extra shift since several nurses had called out, unable to make it in due to the storm. I'd agreed, which meant another early morning and another round of shoveling. When my alarm went off, I dragged myself out of bed and looked out the window. The sky was clear, full of stars, and my driveway was buried under nearly 3 feet of snow now. The storm's total accumulation, plus what had blown around and drifted overnight. I bundled up and went outside, shovel in hand. My back was already protesting from yesterday's work, but I didn't have much choice. I'd been at it for maybe 20 minutes when a different car pulled up. This one was a silver Lexus, and a man in his 60s got out. "Marcus Zanakis," he called. "That's me." He approached carefully, watching his footing on the snow. "I'm Robert Chen, HOA treasurer. I wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday with Eileen." I stopped shoveling and leaned on the handle. "You heard about that. The whole board heard about it. Eileen called an emergency meeting last night and told us she'd had to involve the police with a difficult resident. But then, one of your neighbors, Beth Morrison, called me afterward and told me what actually happened. I pulled the covenant documents and realized Eileen had way overstepped. So I'm not getting fined $500 for refusing to give her my shovel," Robert grimaced. "No. Eileen doesn't have the authority to levy fines unilaterally anyway. All fines require board approval, and there's no covenant provision that would allow us to confiscate personal property." She also told the police I was trespassing at my own house. I heard. That's actually why I'm here. The board held a vote this morning, emergency session by email, and we've decided to remove Eileen as president. She's acted outside her authority multiple times in the past few months, but this was the final straw. I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. "That's good to hear. I wanted to come tell you in person and apologize on behalf of the HOA. What Eileen did was completely unacceptable. We're also waiving your HOA dues for the next 6 months as compensation for the harassment." "I appreciate that. Though honestly, I'd just like to be left alone to shovel my driveway in peace." Robert laughed. "Completely fair. I won't take up any more of your time. But if you have any issues going forward, please don't hesitate to contact me or any other board member. Our information is on the neighborhood website." "Will do. Thanks for coming by." He headed back to his Lexus, and I returned to shoveling. I was feeling significantly better about the situation. Eileen had been removed from power, the board had apologized, and I wasn't getting fined. Case closed as far as I was concerned, except it turned out not to be closed at all. I managed to clear my driveway and get to work on time. My shift was another brutal one, 12 hours of non-stop patience, but we were finally starting to catch up from the storm backlog. I got home around 8 that evening, exhausted but in decent spirits. Those spirits evaporated when I saw what was waiting on my porch. A formal letter, printed on fancy cardstock with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA letterhead, had been taped to my front door. I pulled it down and read it under my porch light. Notice of violation and fine to Marcus Zanakis, 2847 Meadowbrook Lane from Eileen Dalton, HOA President. Date February 16, 2026. You are hereby notified of the following violations of Meadowbrook Estates HOA Covenant Regulations. Violation 1. Failure to comply with Emergency Resource Allocation Directive, Section 12, Paragraph 4. Fine, $500. Violation 2. Aggressive and threatening behavior toward HOA officer, Section 19, Paragraph 1. Fine, $750. Violation 3. Failure to maintain driveway in safe condition, Section 8, Paragraph 3. Fine, $200. Violation 4. Unauthorized police contact resulting in disruption of HOA operations, Section 15, Paragraph 7. Fine, $500. Total fines due. $1,950 payment must be received within 30 days or additional penalties will accrue at a rate of $50 per day. Failure to pay may result in a lien being placed on your property. If you wish to contest these fines, you must submit a written appeal to the HOA board within 10 days. I read the letter twice, feeling my blood pressure rising with each word. Eileen had been removed as president that very morning, according to Robert Chen. So she'd written up this ridiculous fine letter anyway, probably before the board meeting, and decided to deliver it even after being removed from her position. I went inside, scanned the letter with my phone, and immediately emailed it to Robert Chen using the contact information from the HOA website. Then, I sat down and wrote out a detailed account of everything that had happened, from Eileen demanding my shovel to her false police report to this letter. Robert responded within an hour. "This is completely invalid. Eileen is no longer HOA president and has no authority to issue fines. Please disregard this letter entirely. The board will be meeting tomorrow night to discuss taking formal action against Eileen for harassment. I'm very sorry this is continuing." I wrote back thanking him and asking if I needed to do anything else. He said no, just ignore the letter and let the board handle it. I tried to do that. I really did. But over the next week, things escalated. 3 days after the letter, I came home to find a bright orange sticker on my mailbox declaring my property in violation of HOA standards. I peeled it off and emailed a photo to Robert. 2 days after that, someone scratched a long key mark down the passenger side of my truck while it was parked in my driveway. I had no proof it was Eileen, but the timing was suspicious. I filed a police report and got a quote for the paint repair, $800. The following Monday, I received an official-looking letter from HOA Legal Services, Inc., demanding immediate payment of the $1,950 in fines, plus an additional $500 in late fees and legal costs. The letter threatened foreclosure proceedings if payment wasn't received within 15 days. That one actually worried me until I Googled the company. HOA Legal Services, Inc. didn't exist. The address listed was a UPS store in Denver. The phone number went to a disconnected line. It was completely fake. I forwarded it to Robert and also to Officer Davidson, who'd given me his card. This was starting to feel like more than just HOA drama. This felt like harassment, fraud, and possibly extortion. Robert called me that evening. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. The board met tonight and we voted unanimously to ban Eileen from all HOA activities. We've also sent her a cease and desist letter drafted by our actual attorney. If she contacts you again, call the police immediately." I appreciate that, but I'm worried she's not going to stop. So are we. That fake legal letter could be considered fraud. We've reported it to the police as well. What about the damage to my truck? Do you have any proof it was her? No, but it happened right after all this started. I understand, but without proof, there's not much we can do. I'd suggest installing a security camera if you don't have one already. That was good advice. The next day, I bought a Ring doorbell camera and a second camera that covered my driveway. Installation was easy enough, and I felt better knowing I'd have video evidence if anything else happened. For about a week, things were quiet. No letters, no stickers, no damage. I started to relax, thinking maybe the cease and desist letter had actually worked. Then I got a call from the Aurora Police Department asking me to come down to the station. I went in the next morning before my shift, confused and worried. Officer Davidson met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room. "Thanks for coming in," he said. "I wanted to talk to you about Eileen Dalton. What's happened now? She filed a complaint against you yesterday. She's claiming you've been harassing her, threatening her, and stalking her." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "That's completely false. I've had zero contact with her since you escorted her off my property. I've been the one being harassed." "I know. We've been documenting everything." But her complaint is pretty detailed. She's claiming you've been driving past her house multiple times a day, leaving threatening notes and making phone calls. I don't even know where she lives, and I definitely haven't been leaving notes or making calls. Check my phone records if you want. Officer Davidson held up a hand. "I believe you. The problem is she's filed a formal complaint, which means we have to investigate. I wanted to give you a heads up and get your side of the story on record." I spent the next 30 minutes going through everything again, from the original shovel incident to the fake legal letter. Officer Davidson took notes and asked clarifying questions. "Here's what I think is happening," he said when I was done. "Miss Dalton is trying to establish a paper trail that makes her look like the victim. If this goes to court, either for the HOA issues or anything else, she wants to be able to say you were the aggressor. So what do I do? Keep documenting everything. Don't contact her under any circumstances. If you see her, don't engage, and seriously consider getting a restraining order. You have enough evidence of harassment to qualify." Will that make this worse? It might escalate things in the short term, but it also establishes a legal boundary. If she violates it, she can be arrested. I left the police station feeling sick. All I'd done was refuse to give this woman my shovel during a snowstorm, and now I was dealing with false complaints, possible fraud charges, and the need for a restraining order. I called in sick to work, something I almost never did, and went to see a lawyer instead. I found an attorney named Patricia Hughes who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Her consultation fee was $200, but she came highly recommended. Patricia listened to my story, reviewed all the documentation I'd brought, and nodded thoughtfully. You've got a strong case for harassment and potentially defamation if she's made false statements about you to others. The fake legal letter is definitely fraud. And if she actually filed a false police complaint, that's a crime. So what should I do? First, file for a restraining order. I can help you with that. Second, consider filing a civil lawsuit for harassment and damages. You've got the truck repair, your time and stress, and the impact on your peace of mind. Third, cooperate fully with the police investigation into the fraud letter. How much is all this going to cost? The restraining order is relatively cheap, maybe $500 in filing fees and my time. A civil lawsuit would be more, several thousand depending on how far it goes. But if you win, she'd be responsible for your legal fees. I authorized her to proceed with the restraining order application. She said she'd have it filed by the end of the week. That was on a Wednesday. On Friday evening, I got home from work to find Eileen Dalton sitting in her BMW in front of my house. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Officer Davidson had said not to engage, but she was on a public street, not my property, so I couldn't call the police for trespassing. I grabbed my phone, opened the video recording app, and got out of my truck. If she was going to confront me, I wanted evidence. She got out of her BMW as I approached my front door. "Marcus, we need to talk," she called. "I have nothing to say to you, Eileen. Please leave." "Just 5 minutes, I want to explain." "No, leave my property. I'm not on your property." "I'm on the street." She was right, technically. I unlocked my front door, keeping my phone aimed in her direction. "You've ruined my life," she said, her voice rising. "The HOA board kicked me out. My neighbors won't talk to me. My husband is furious about the legal fees. All because you wouldn't be a team player during an emergency. You tried to take my personal property. You filed a false police report. You sent me fraudulent legal documents. That's not on me, Eileen. I was trying to help Mrs. Patterson. She's 87 years old and her driveway was buried, but you were too selfish to care. You could have asked nicely. You could have offered to pay me for my time. You could have knocked on doors and organized volunteers. Instead, you tried to order me around and threatened me with fines. Then you escalated it to harassment and fraud. I never harassed you. You put stickers on my mailbox. You sent fake legal letters. You filed a false police complaint. That's textbook harassment. Her face was red, veins standing out on her neck. You can't prove any of that was me. Actually, the police are investigating the fake legal letter right now, and I've applied for a restraining order against you. That stopped her cold. You what? I filed for a restraining order. You've been harassing me for weeks. I want it to stop. How dare you? I'm the victim here. You need to leave now, Eileen. Don't contact me again. I went inside and locked the door, my hands shaking. Through the window, I watched her stand there for a long moment before finally getting back in her BMW and driving away. I immediately called Officer Davidson and reported the encounter. He said he'd make a note of it and that it would support my restraining order application. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Patricia Hughes represented me. Eileen showed up with her own lawyer, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who seemed like he'd rather be anywhere else. The hearing was in front of a judge named Barbara Winters, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd apparently seen every kind of neighbor dispute imaginable. Patricia presented our case, walking through the timeline from the shovel incident to the fake legal letter to Eileen showing up at my house, despite being told to stay away. She submitted all the documentation, the fine letters, photos of the mailbox sticker, the fake legal letter, police reports, and the video I'd taken of our last encounter. Eileen's lawyer tried to argue that his client had been acting in her capacity as HOA president and had every right to enforce covenant rules. Patricia immediately countered that Eileen had been removed as president and even when she held the position, had exceeded her authority. Miss Dalton has engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment against my client, Patricia said. She's filed false police reports, created fraudulent legal documents, and continued to contact Mr. Zanakis even after being told to cease all communication. This isn't an HOA dispute. This is harassment. Judge Winters asked Eileen directly about the fake legal letter. Did you create and send a letter from a company called HOA Legal Services, Inc.? Eileen hesitated. I may have drafted a letter that was firm in tone, but I was trying to get Mr. Zanakis to comply with legitimate HOA rules. That's not what I asked. Did you create a letter using a company name that doesn't exist? Another hesitation. Yes. And you sent this letter on letterhead that made it appear to be from a legitimate legal services company. I was trying to encourage compliance. That's fraud, Miss Dalton. You created a fake company and fake legal documents to intimidate someone into paying money they didn't actually owe. That's a crime. Eileen's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Your Honor, my client may have used poor judgment, but her intentions were to uphold neighborhood standards. Her intentions are irrelevant. Her actions constitute fraud and harassment. Judge Winters looked at me. Mr. Zanakis, has Miss Dalton caused you financial harm? Yes, Your Honor. $800 in vehicle damage that I believe she caused, plus $200 for a police consultation, and $500 in legal fees so far for this restraining order. Can you prove Miss Dalton damaged your vehicle? No direct proof, but it happened during this conflict and I've had no other issues with neighbors. Judge Winters nodded and made some notes. Then she looked at Eileen. Miss Dalton, I'm granting Mr. Zanakis' request for a restraining order. You are to stay at least 100 yards away from his home, his vehicle, and his person. You may not contact him directly or indirectly. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand? Yes, Eileen said quietly. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution for fraud and filing a false police report. You should expect to hear from them. Eileen's face went white. Her lawyer started to say something, but Judge Winters cut him off. We're done here. Bailiff, please provide Miss Dalton with a copy of the restraining order. Patricia and I left the courtroom. In the hallway, she turned to me with a satisfied expression. That went about as well as it could have. The restraining order is in place, and the judge took the fraud seriously enough to involve the DA. You should be clear from here on out. What happens next? The DA will investigate. If they decide to prosecute, Eileen could face criminal charges. In the meantime, she legally cannot contact you or come near you. If she does, call the police immediately and she'll be arrested for violating the order. And my truck damage. You could file a civil claim in small claims court, but without proof it was her, it might be hard to win. Up to you if you want to pursue it. I decided to let the truck damage go. $800 hurt, but I just wanted this whole situation to be over. For 3 weeks, I had blissful peace. No letters, no encounters, no drama. The HOA board appointed Robert Chen as the new president, and he sent out a neighborhood-wide email explaining that there had been some administrative issues that were now resolved. He didn't mention Eileen by name, but everyone knew what had happened. My neighbors were actually really supportive. The woman who lived next door, Sarah Martinez, brought over cookies and apologized for not speaking up sooner. I knew Eileen was out of control, but I didn't realize how bad it had gotten with you. If I'd known, I would have said something to the board. It's okay, I told her. "It's resolved now." But it wasn't quite resolved yet. 3 weeks after the restraining order hearing, I got a call from a prosecutor named James Mitchell at the Denver District Attorney's office. "Mr. Zanakis, I'm calling about the case involving Eileen Dalton. We've completed our investigation and have decided to file charges. I wanted to let you know and see if you'd be willing to testify." "What charges?" "Criminal fraud, filing a false police report, and harassment. All misdemeanors, but she's facing potential jail time and fines." "I'll testify if you need me to." "Good. The preliminary hearing is in 2 weeks. I'll send you the details." The preliminary hearing was mostly procedural. Eileen showed up with a different lawyer this time, a sharp-looking woman who seemed much more competent than the first one. She entered a not guilty plea, which wasn't surprising. The trial was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the restraining order was still in effect, and Eileen was apparently complying with it. I didn't see her or hear from her at all. The trial itself was anticlimactic. The prosecution presented all the evidence: the fake legal letter, the false police report, documentation of the harassment. I testified about what had happened, from the shovel demand to Eileen showing up at my house after being told to stay away. Eileen's lawyer tried to argue that her client had been acting in good faith to uphold HOA rules and had simply made some errors in judgment. But the fake legal letter was hard to explain away. The prosecutor pointed out that Eileen had deliberately created a fraudulent document to intimidate someone into paying money they didn't owe. That was textbook fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Eileen guilty on all 3 charges. Sentencing was 2 weeks later. Judge Winters was handling that as well. She looked at Eileen with clear disappointment. "Miss Dalton, you held a position of responsibility in your community. Instead of using that position to help your neighbors, you abused it to harass and intimidate someone who simply refused to comply with your unreasonable demands. Then, when you faced consequences for your actions, you escalated to fraud and filing false reports. This behavior is unacceptable." Eileen stood silently, her face pale. "I'm sentencing you to 90 days in county jail, suspended pending completion of 2 years of probation. You'll also pay a fine of $5,000 and complete 100 hours of community service. Additionally, you are permanently banned from holding any position in a homeowners association. If you violate the terms of your probation, you will serve the full 90 days. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Eileen said quietly, and that was it. Eileen walked out of the courtroom with her lawyer, and I never saw her again. The HOA board sent out another neighborhood email after the trial, explaining that the former president had been convicted of criminal charges related to her conduct, and that the board had implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar abuses in the future. Robert Chen also announced that the board was revising the covenant documents to clarify the limits of HOA authority and establish better appeals processes for fines. I was invited to serve on the Covenant Revision Committee, which I declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. Life slowly returned to normal. Winter turned to spring, and I focused on work and settling into my house. I made friends with several neighbors, including Sarah Martinez and a couple named Tom and Linda Garrett who lived 3 doors down. They were good people, and we'd get together for barbecues or to watch football. I never did get reimbursed for the damage to my truck, but I let it go. The insurance covered most of it after my deductible, and it didn't seem worth pursuing in small claims court. About 6 months after the trial, I was out mowing my lawn on a Saturday when a moving truck pulled up to Eileen's house. I watched from my yard as movers loaded furniture in boxes. A man I assumed was her husband supervised, looking tired and defeated. Eileen herself was nowhere to be seen. Sarah came out of her house and walked over. "Did you hear they're getting divorced?" "No, but I can't say I'm surprised. Apparently, the legal fees and the criminal conviction were too much. Her husband filed 3 months ago. She's moving to Grand Junction to live with her sister." "Good riddance," I said, and I meant it. The house sold within a month to a young couple with a toddler. They were friendly and normal, and our interactions consisted of friendly waves and occasional small talk about the weather. Exactly what neighbor relations should be. The HOA board completed their revision of the covenant documents by the end of summer. The new version clearly spelled out what authority the board had, and more importantly, what authority it didn't have. There were new appeals processes for fines, requirements for board votes before major actions, and explicit language stating that the HOA had no right to confiscate personal property or restrict owners' use of their own homes beyond reasonable standards for appearance and safety. Robert Chen remained president and did a good job. Dues stayed reasonable, common areas were maintained, and the board operated transparently. It was everything an HOA should be. As for me, I kept working at the hospital, kept my lawn mowed and my driveway shoveled, and enjoyed my house. I bought a snowblower after that first winter, which made the next year's storms much easier to handle. And I never, not once, had anyone try to take it from me. Sometimes when I was out shoveling or mowing, I'd think about that morning when Eileen had shown up demanding my shovel. It seemed almost absurd in retrospect. All she'd had to do was ask nicely. If she'd explained the situation with Mrs. Patterson and asked if I could help when I was done with my own driveway, I probably would have said yes. I'm not a monster. I understood that elderly neighbors might need help during major storms, but instead, she'd chosen to approach it as a power play. She tried to order me around, threatened me with fines, and then escalated to harassment and fraud when I refused to comply. All over a shovel. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons. First, read HOA documents carefully before buying and pay attention to how the board operates. Second, document everything when dealing with difficult people. The paper trail I'd created had been essential in court. Third, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, even when someone is using official-sounding authority to try to intimidate you. And fourth, most importantly, never underestimate what some people will do when they feel their authority is being challenged. About a year after everything happened, I ran into Officer Davidson at a coffee shop near the hospital. He recognized me immediately. "Marcus, right? The HOA shovel guy," I laughed. "That's me. How'd everything turn out?" "Good. Eileen got convicted, moved away, and I haven't had any problems since. New HOA president is reasonable." "Glad to hear it. That was one of the weirder calls I've dealt with. Woman tried to have someone arrested for trespassing at their own house." He shook his head. "I've been doing this for 7 years, and I'm still amazed by some of the stuff people do." "Well, thanks for handling it professionally. You could have just blown it off as neighbor drama. Part of the job. And honestly, it was pretty clear she was in the wrong from the start." The fake legal letter really sealed it. We chatted for a few more minutes, then went our separate ways. It was a nice bit of closure running into him like that. I still live in that house in Meadowbrook Estates. It's been almost 2 years now since the shovel incident, and life is good. The neighborhood is quiet, the HOA is functional but not intrusive, and I've built a good life here in Aurora. My driveway is always clear in winter, thanks to the snowblower. My lawn is always mowed in summer. I follow all the reasonable HOA rules about keeping my property maintained. and I've never once had another problem with anyone trying to take my equipment or harass me about covenant violations. Sometimes new neighbors will move in and ask about the HOA, wanting to know if it's one of those nightmare HOAs they've heard about. I tell them it used to have some issues, but it's been well run for the past couple of years. If they press for details, I might mention that there was a problem with the previous president overstepping her authority, but it got resolved through the proper channels. I don't usually tell the full story unless someone really asks. It's not that I'm ashamed or trying to hide anything. It's just that the story of how the HOA president demanded my shovel during a snowstorm and ended up getting convicted of fraud sounds too ridiculous to be real. People might think I'm exaggerating, but every word of it is true. And somewhere in Grand Junction, Eileen Dalton is presumably living her life, hopefully having learned something from the experience. Though based on her behavior during the trial and sentencing, where she maintained she'd done nothing wrong and was being persecuted for trying to help the neighborhood, I'm not sure she learned anything at all. Some people are just like that. They get a little bit of power and it goes to their heads. They start believing they're entitled to order other people around to take what they want, to punish anyone who doesn't fall in line. And when they face consequences, they see themselves as the victim. I'm just glad I stood my ground. If I'd caved that first morning and given Eileen my shovel, who knows what other demands she would have made. She'd probably have seen me as an easy target and continued finding ways to assert her authority over me. Instead, by refusing to be intimidated and documenting everything carefully, I was able to protect myself and ultimately help the entire neighborhood by getting a problematic board president removed. The whole experience made me more confident in dealing with authority figures, whether that's HOA boards, supervisors at work, or anyone else who tries to throw their weight around. I know my rights now. I know how to document problems, when to get lawyers involved, and how to use the legal system to protect myself. Those are valuable skills that I never wanted to learn, but I'm glad I have. And I still have my shovel. It's sitting in my garage right now, along with the snowblower, a rake, a leaf blower, and all my other yard equipment. All of it mine, all of it staying that way on snowy mornings when I'm out clearing my driveway before work. I sometimes remember that conversation with Eileen. I need that shovel immediately. Like it was the most reasonable request in the world, like I was being difficult by wanting to keep my own property. I think about what would have happened if I just handed it over. Would she have returned it? Would she have compensated me for my time or the use of my equipment? Or would it have been the first of many demands, each one pushing the boundaries a little further? I'll never know for sure, but I suspect it would have been the latter. People like Eileen don't stop when you give in. They escalate, so I'm glad I said no. I'm glad I stood on my driveway that freezing morning and refused to be bullied. I'm glad I documented everything that followed and pursued it through the proper legal channels. And I'm glad that when she showed up with the police, trying to have me removed from my own home, Officer Davidson saw through her act and took the situation seriously. The system worked in the end. It took time and money and stress, but justice was done. Eileen faced consequences for her actions. The HOA reformed its practices, and I got to stay in my home, living my life without harassment. That's really all I wanted from the beginning. Just to be left alone to shovel my driveway in peace. Is that really too much to ask?